Even 1,000 arms are not enough to reach out and relieve all of the suffering of all sentient beings. And yet, it's better than nothing. Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm a Buddhist practitioner out here in the world, having experienced the loss of my loved ones and knowing how much my Buddhist practice helped me on my grief journey. And now, together, we have this safe space to discuss death, dying, grief, and the Buddhist teachings that help us really understand attachment, impermanence, being compassionate, being death ready, what it means to live a life so that we can have a peaceful death. Yep, it's a big topic, and we're going to take it on together. Let's go. Popular Buddhist legend tells us that Avalokiteshvara vowed not to rest until he had freed all sentient beings from samsara. And he tried. And then he realized that there's so many unhappy beings yet to be saved that he couldn't do it. Now, Amitabha helped out by helping him have 11 heads, can you imagine, with which to hear the cries of the suffering. But then hearing the cries and understanding them, Avalokiteśvara tries to reach out, but found that 2 arms were not enough, and so his arms shattered into pieces, where once again Amitabha helps out by giving him 1,000 arms with which to aid the suffering multitudes. And throughout the ages, we've always been able to look around and see that there are others who are suffering and who need assistance. And so Avalokiteshvara, who probably first emerged in the 1st century Common Era, has been a popular Buddhist saint, I'll say Buddhist deity really, one whom we still call upon today across our various traditions. If you ever use the chant Om Mani Padme Hum, often that is considered to be a way of calling out to Avalokiteshvara for help and compassion. And if the name Avalokiteshvara doesn't ring true to you, it could be my pronunciation, or it could be that you're used to hearing about Guanyin, which is what we hear more often from Chinese Buddhism. And in fact, I believe the original translations used something very similar to the name Guanyin, with the name Avalokiteśvara popping up in Sanskrit in later centuries. And in traditions now, although Avalokiteśvara is a male deity, Guanyin is female and is the goddess of compassion. And you may see Guanyin depicted many places. I know that when I go to a nail salon here in Southern California, that I will see very often shrines to Guanyin, the goddess of compassion. In whatever form or name that you come across this Bodhisattva of compassion, this Bodhisattva of compassion teaches us how to model new ways of acting that enable us to skillfully help other beings. And so this is a representation, a reminder that we have the ability to help other beings escape from suffering. As you might guess, if you are a god or goddess of compassion, depending on the depiction that you've been given, you are powerful. And so some of the powers and abilities attributed is, of course, boundless compassion, the immense amounts of empathy and wisdom, and the ability to use those virtues as his powers, or again, in other cultures, her powers. In fact, so this gender fluidity. And so sometimes when Avalokiteshvara is Guanyin, Guanyin might be male or Guanyin might be female. In today's world, I think we're seeing more female versions, but there's still the ability for that gender fluidity, which is attributed to, I'm going to just say his for this since I started with Avalokiteshvara, who is him, his ability to change in order to suit the situation at hand, in order to help others as needed. And of course, there's many different stories of his helping others. So he utilized his virtues as his powers, and his commitment to altruism is considered to be so deep, so immense, that he, of course, like other bodhisattvas, has postponed his own attainment of Buddhahood until every sentient being on earth achieves liberation. Now, that belief doesn't exist in all of our Buddhist traditions, but Avalokiteśvara, although recognized in Sri Lanka and Myanmar and other countries that are considered to be more Theravada practicing countries, and they do recognize Avalokiteśvara, and again, in his other names, other incarnations, mostly came about from early Mahayana, where he, again, is about to helping us achieve liberation from the suffering of samsara and, rebirth, the cycle of rebirth. So he's supposed to be responsive to the cries of sentient beings and is always pledging assistance. And as I said earlier, the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum is linked with his essence and believed to invoke his blessings and cleanse the mind. And I will tell you that although I practice more a Theravada practice, I have found the chant or the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum to be very reassuring to me in times of stress and upset. He's got this ability to bring blessings and help us cleanse our minds, manifest in various forms, traverse different realms, which shows that he is a universal protector and guide. So he can go across the realms, not just the human realm. We can make a case that Avalokiteśvara is the most popular bodhisattva. And how did that come about? And for that, I'm going to point you towards a Mahayana sutra called the Basket Display. And I'm not going to be able to read you the whole sutra because it is 89 pages, but I will tell you a little bit about it. So first, some background. So it's considered to be the source of the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, which I've already addressed as being associated with Avalokiteśvara. And it is said to mark a big stage in the growing importance of Avalokiteśvara within Indian Buddhism in the early centuries of the first millennium. And so to be clear, this is not something from the Pali Canon, and I just call that out because I very often am calling out to you scriptures from the Pali Canon. So this is not from the Pali Canon. Now, it's a series of narratives within narratives, and it describes Avalokiteśvara's activities in various realms, right? We talked about how he can be in different realms, and the realms contained within the pores of his skin. So that's interesting. And it culminates in a description of the extreme rarity of his mantra, which on the Buddha's instructions, another bodhisattva obtains from someone in Varanasi who has broken his monastic vows. So this sutra provides a basis and source of quotations for the teachings and the practice of something that pops up later in 11th century Tibetan Buddhism called the Mani Padme Hum, also another part of the foundation of the tradition of the Tibetan practice of Avalokiteśvara. Now, this sutra probably dates to the 5th century Common Era, although I have found some information that says 1st century. Probably the most reliable is 5th century Common Era. In terms of where, it shows familiarity with Varanasi, assumes the reader understands a little bit about Chandravipa. This is in the southern part of Bengal, where the delta of the Ganges is situated. In the Tibetan version of this sutra, merchants who wish to sail to Lanka, or you and I would think of it as Sri Lanka, ask whether the winds are blowing toward the land of the Greeks. So this seems to place them on the northwest coast of India. In terms of time, it's located within a culture where the Mahabharata and the Puranas had a dominant place in Indian culture. So that's part of why it's being said the 5th century, because those cultures are prominent during the Gupta period, which is the 3rd to 5th century Common Era. Eventually, practices and recognition of Avalokiteśvara spread throughout the world of Buddhism. I mean, here I am, and I know of Avalokiteśvara. Some will compare the Avalokiteśvara from this sutra to Shiva from the Hindu pantheon, because of the Om Mani Padme Hum passage and how there was the Om Namah Shiva, or homage to Shiva, as they're similar in nature. And so there's a thought that perhaps they are coming from the same time, and that perhaps the Avalokiteśvara Om Mani Padme Hum was fashioned after the style Om Namah Shiva. The sutra itself isn't read that often, so the passages, of course, on the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra come up. The sutra itself is difficult because it's, narratives within narratives, right? Stories within stories. It's easy to lose your place, right? It's easy to lose your place. Like if you've ever read something and it's like there's a story within a story within a story, it takes a lot of concentration. It's really easy to lose your place. And it includes a Jataka tale, a well-known Jataka tale, but it includes a variation of the Jataka tale in which Buddha is a horse and saves merchants from an island of Rakshas, which are like difficult, I'll say evil beings, like almost like a demonic kind of situation. Here, though, the story is told that Avalokiteśvara is the horse and the Buddha is the head merchant. That contradicts earlier teachings. It also puts Avalokiteśvara in a position of superiority. And there is a belief in some of the teachings that Avalokiteśvara was superior to, of course, all the other bodhisattvas, but also superior to the Buddha. But then had a interesting relationship with Amitabha Buddha, where Amitabha Buddha, remember, helped Avalokiteśvara by giving him the 1,000 arms. But there's kind of this back and forth relationship between Amitabha and Avalokiteśvara. Avalokiteśvara might be sometimes considered superior to Amitabha, but then also is subservient to Amitabha. Now, on that note, I am going to provide a summary of the story from the Basket's Display Sutra. The Buddha was with his monks at the monastery at Jetavana. Lights shine upon the monastery and miraculously transform it. Another bodhisattva asks the Buddha where the lights come from. And the Buddha explains that they came from Avalokiteśvara, who had just visited the Avicii hell and the city of the Pretas, and then describes those visits. Then Buddha recounts being a merchant at the time of Buddha Vipassan, and how he heard him describe how various deities, including Shiva and Vishnu, were created from Avalokiteshvara's body. Buddha recounts being a bodhisattva named Dhanasari at the time of Buddha Sakin, and how light rays shone from Buddha Sakin, I think it's Sakin, in response to questioning by Bodhisattva Ratnapani. Sakin says that the lights and other omens are a sign of the approach of Avalokiteshvara, who then arrives from Sukhavati with an offering of lotuses from Buddha Amitabha. After Avalokiteshvara's departure, Sakin describes to Ratnapani how Avalokiteshvara's accumulation of merit is inconceivable by using a series of analogies. Then he describes how Avalokiteshvara teaches this very sutra to the asuras in the form of an asura. Buddha Shakyamuni then states that he was a rishi at the time of the Buddha Visavabhu. Buddha relates how Avalokiteshvara taught upside-down beings in the realm of gold and four-legged beings in the land of silver. There's a long description of Avalokiteshvara's visit to the Asuras in the land of iron. Avalokiteshvara teaches the Asuras the inconceivable merit that comes from making offerings to a Buddha. Bali, the king of the Asuras, tells Avalokiteshvara that he had in the past made an offering to the wrong recipient. He had imprisoned all the Kshatriyas, but Vishnu secretly freed them and came to him in the form of a dwarf, asking for 2 steps of land. Bali offered him 3, but Vishnu took on his divine form and covered the whole world in 2 steps. He then banished Bali to the underworld, where he now dwells for having failed to fulfill his promise. Avalokiteshvara then describes to him the suffering in hells that await for those who have not made offerings to the Buddha. Avalokiteshvara then radiates light rays, and his pupils are residing in Jetavana Monastery. Bodhisattva Gaganagajanja asked Visabahu where the lights came from. Visavabu, states that the lights are a sign that Avalokiteshvara is coming. However, Avalokiteshvara first goes to a land of darkness to teach the yakshas and rakshas about the merit that comes from this sutra. Then Avalokiteshvara goes to the Sudavasa realms, where in the form of a Brahmin he begs from a poor deva. The deva goes into his empty palace to give him whatever he has, but finds it full of jewels and food that he then offers to the Brahmin, which is again Avalokiteshvara in the form of a Brahmin, who tells the deva that he is a bodhisattva from Jetavana monastery. Avalokiteshvara then descends to Simhala, the land of the Rakshas, in the form of a handsome man. He agrees to be their husband if they follow his instructions, which they do, giving up killing. Then he travels to Varanasi, where in the form of a bee, he buzzes the prayer of homage to the three jewels, to the insects in a large cesspit, liberating them. Then he goes to Magadha, where starving beings have been eating each other for 20 years, and he causes a rain of food to fall. One of the people, who is a man, is hundreds of thousands of years old, realizes that only Avalokiteshvara could have caused this miracle, and tells the others of the benefits of making offerings to him. Avalokiteshvara then goes to the Buddha Visavahu. Bodhisattva Gagangaja meets him, and Visavahu teaches the 6 perfections, and the audience disperses. And that's the end of part 1. Okay, so I think you can see that it's rather complicated. There's, again, even in a summary, there's stories within stories. It's in part 2 where we encounter the Jataka tale, but where it's the role of Buddha and Avalokiteshvara are reversed. The Buddha recounts being a head merchant who became stranded on Simhali Island with other merchants. Each of them go to live with a Raksha. One night, a talking lamp warns the head merchant that the women are all Rakshas. As proof, the lamp directs him to an iron fortress where other merchants are being kept prisoner and then eaten. Then the lamp tells him of Balaha, a miraculous horse on which the merchants can escape. As they flee upon the horse, all the other merchants look back, fall off the horse, and are eaten by the Rakshas, while the head merchant reaches home safely. And Buddha states that Avalokiteshvara was the horse. Then the Buddha begins to describe 2 pores on Avalokiteshvara's body and their inhabitants. So this is where we get into pores on the body of Avalokiteshvara are perhaps realms. So he describes 2 of them. He describes another pore and explains that the pores are immaterial and cannot be seen even by Buddhas. He describes 2 more pores, saying that those who remember Avalokiteshvara's name, which is his secret mantra, will be reborn in these pores. And no one, not even the Buddhas, know this mantra. He describes more benefits from the mantra, and the listeners declare their intention to obtain the mantra. Buddha Sakyamuni recounts his own search for it until after meeting trillions of Buddhas, he finally met Buddha Ratnamata, who directed him to Buddha Padmatma, and Padmatama describes the incalculable benefits that come from saying the mantra once, and then describes his own long, fruitless search for the mantra until he came to Buddha Amitabha, who instructed Avalokiteshvara to give the mantra to Padmamata. Avalokiteshvara does so through a mandala made of precious stones and gives the instructions on how to make the mandala. Buddha follows this narrative with a description of how incalculable the benefits are from even one syllable. The Buddha then says that he can only obtain it from an unnamed Dharma. The Buddha says that he can only obtain it from an unnamed Dharmabhanika who has lost his monastic vows and lives in Varanasi. They go to him in a huge procession of people and offerings. The Dharmabhanika describes the benefits of the mantra, and at the urging of Avalokiteshvara, who appears in the sky, gives them the mantra, and those who visited in turn return to Buddha. 70 million Buddhas recite the mantra of the goddess known as Kundi or Kunda. Buddha then describes 5 more Avalokiteshvara's pores. the oceans that come from his big toe, and there are no more pores but those 10. Then omens of Avalokiteshvara's arrival appear. He leaves Sukhavati and comes to the Buddha and offers him lotuses from Buddha Amitabha. Buddha then directs Mahavassara and Umadevi to receive the prophecies of their future Buddhahood from Avalokiteshvara. The Buddha then teaches about the immenseness, the vastness of Avalokiteshvara's merit. The Buddha recounts a time where he was with Buddha Karakuchanda and saw Samitabhra and Avalokiteshvara both practicing various samadhis. And there's a declaration made that not even the Buddhas have the samadhis that Avalokiteshvara has. Buddha describes the benefits that come from this sutra. Avalokiteshvara departs. Then Ananda requests teachings on monastic conduct, and the Buddha prophesies how there will be monks who do not maintain their conduct in the future and who should be expelled. He describes the tortures in hell and other rebirths that await lay people who misuse the property of the Sangha. Ananda departs, and the sutra concludes. So in part 1, we really gain an understanding of Avalokiteshvara and his ability and desire to really help those who are suffering. We have many examples of his ability to assist those who need assistance. And in part 2, we see the Buddha contrasted to Avalokiteshvara, and really Avalokiteshvara is given an elevated position. And the importance of the mantra, that secret 6-syllable mantra, which happens to be Om Mani Padme Hum, and how that mantra came to be handed down, and the importance of it, and the vast amounts of merit that Avalokiteshvara has for his works. And we can correlate then, if he has that vast amount of merit from his works, then how much even more powerful is his mantra. And this matters to all of us because we are in season 4, where we are talking about beings who help alleviate the suffering of others. And sometimes we've been talking about human beings. We've talked about Anathapindika, a human being who was living during the time of the Buddha and helped set up so many of the places where the Buddha was able to stay and teach. And now we have a bodhisattva who is here and still here with us to help us with our relief from suffering. And if they can do all of that, we know that we too can do our part to help others gain relief from suffering. I've got books for you, starting with Carpooling with Death, How Living with Death Will Make You Stronger, Wiser, and Fearless, the book that got me going and helped me to discuss going through the death of my loved ones, followed by Sitting with Death, Buddhist insights to help you face your fears and live a peaceful life, based on season 1 of the Death Dhamma podcast. And just recently, Enlightenment Unleashed, how your pet can lead you to spiritual transformation, because during our lifetime, we may see the rising and ceasing of many pets, and we love them like they are our family. Find these on Amazon.com or come see me at MargaretMaloney.com. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on MargaretMaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.